Okay, we're rolling.
Okay, this is an interview at the Motel 8, Kingston, New York. It is the 15th of July, 2004, 9 a.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
It's Irwin Gellen, June 2nd, 1923, in Brooklyn.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
I completed the undergraduate course for electrical engineering at the CCNY.
Okay. Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Vividly. I imagine most people who lived on December 7th, 1941 would remember that. I was playing touch football with some friends in the street in Brooklyn, near where I lived. I found it difficult to believe, actually. I thought it might be a hoax of some sort, initially.
Okay. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
It's an interesting story. I enlisted. It's kind of complex. It's a story of how fate influences the conditions of one's life so vividly. I happened quite fortuitously to live in a region or in a section of Brooklyn where the draft board had ample supply of draftees. So initially they exempted from the draft all engineering students. Then as time went on, they started drafting freshmen. But by that time I had moved on to my sophomore year. And then when they started drafting sophomores, I had moved into my junior year. And when I was a senior, we were neck and neck, the draft board and I. It was obvious to me that the inevitable was about to happen. And the Navy had a program, I think it was called V7, which I tried out for, but because I'm colorblind, I was not accepted. In the spring of 1944, actually late in the spring, I had accumulated enough credits at the time to qualify for graduation if I entered a military service. The Maritime service came to City, and they were desperate, I suppose, for people to qualify for a program they had where if you went to sea for 3 months, you could become an engineering officer, a marine engineer. It sounded like the best of all the alternatives available to me, so I took advantage of that. And I left New York on June 5th, 1944, on a Liberty ship. But
Now, did you get any prior training or anything for this, or just on-the-job training?
None at all. This program required you to take any seagoing job for at least 3 months. And the lowest job in the engine room of a ship, I don't even know if this position now even exists in modern ships. There's a job called a wiper. And it's self-descriptive. You were supposed to keep the engine room clean. Modern ships are almost hygienic in their cleanliness. The reciprocating engines in a Liberty ship were far from conducive to that kind of atmosphere. So they needed people to keep the place, for one thing, oil-free, so people didn't slide around on the steel deck. And so I did that. I took one trip on a Liberty ship. We went to Scotland. I carried tanks and other heavy artillery pieces. I then was a wiper on a troop transporter. It had been a luxury liner before the war, the SS Brazil. It was a very large ship. We carried Americans on the first trip. We took them to Liverpool and brought back German prisoners. The second trip I took on it, we went to Omaha Beach, where we disembarked Americans onto landing craft, and they went onto the beach. This was after D-Day, a month after D-Day, and we brought back more Germans. A lot of them wounded, but ambulatory, and they were brought back to the United States. I suppose most of the Germans ended up working on farms in the Midwest and in Canada. Then, because, by the way, you're in distinguished company, I have the world's record for seasickness. I found an opportunity to go to a maritime school at Fort Trumbull, Connecticut, where for 4 months I studied engineering, which for me was really duck soup. And it was especially pleasant because a friend of mine from City College and 2 friends of his from City, the 4 of us shared a room in a barracks. And since we all had an engineering background, while other people were studying, we were playing. So for 4 months, that was pretty much a lark. We arranged to work in the mess hall during the week for breakfast to get Liberty on Saturdays. So after dinner on Friday, the 4 of us took a train into New York City for the weekend. And that was a lark. After that, we went to, the 4 of us went to school, a maritime school in Milwaukee. There was a program in Milwaukee. Milwaukee, by the way, was chosen for this school because the Nordberg engine plant was there. Nordberg at that time made diesel engines, and they were making an engine for a ship called the AV-1, which was a very shallow draft designed for getting into the beaches in the Pacific. The program went down the drain, but nevertheless, the school was there in Milwaukee, so we went there for a month. And then I went back to see it. I sailed as a junior engineer on a T2 tanker. We carried 10,000 tons of aviation gasoline. Eventually, it was a torturous route we took, but we ended up in Calcutta. The trip took us through the Suez Canal, and the one experience I remember about that is while we were in the canal, I was on watch about 4 o'clock in the morning. I went up on deck to see what the canal looked like, and we were in a very narrow portion of the canal, and here was a guy riding a camel alongside the ship, and we were eyeball to eyeball. I was looking at him, he was looking at me, and the sun was coming up over the desert. It was a piece of that trip that I remember vividly. Oh, also on that trip, in the Red Sea, there was a we were out of sight of land, but there was a sandstorm in the desert that filled our ship with sand. There was red dust in the drawers of a piece of furniture. All my clothing was, my shoes were full of sand. It was, I just recalled that. We went to Calcutta, offloaded. Oh, as deck cargo, we carried the Black Widow fighters. I think they were used in the China-Burma fighting.
Now, were those aircraft, were they covered with cosmoline or any kind of protection?
Yes, and they had some sort of canvas covering over that, as I recall. I don't remember too much about it. I just remember worrying about all the gasoline I was sitting on while we were en route. That trip ended up to be 6.5 months. I went, and not in a straight line, but we ended up going completely around the world. And every time, every 15 degrees further east you go, you save an hour, and that hour always happened on my watch. And so when I finally got back to New York, I was a day older than everybody else who I had left behind, sort of like the Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days character. Oh, it took us a lot more than 80 days. I don't know what else you want to know about that.
Well, so basically you were on tankers, and so and that's basically your duty was on tankers. What did you do? What were your particular duties?
Marine engineers operate and maintain the steam plant on a steamship, of course. The steam plant, the propulsion engines. On a tanker, the main engine is used for driving pumps to offload cargo, and maybe they can be used to take on cargo, although usually the shoreside facilities had that provision, for onloading. I also sailed on a Victory ship, and this was after the war ended. I was still subjected to other military service if I stopped sailing, so I had to stay in for, the war ended, we were still in, VJ Day, we were anchored in the mouth of the Ganges, and it was almost a year later before I left the maritime service completely. And during that period, I sailed Victory ships. And interestingly enough, the farm animal population in Eastern Europe had been decimated during the war. So UNRWA, which is a branch of the United Nations, decided to send farm animals to Eastern Europe. And the Victory ship that I was on had been converted to carry mostly horses. We carried, I forgot how many, there must have been about 2,000. This is just a guess, because my memory is about 2,000 horses and some cattle too. And that ship smelled like a barnyard, you can imagine. And I made 2 trips. We took the animals to Gdynia, which is a seaport in Poland.
Now, were you ever given liberty in any of these ports?
Yeah, but usually for a very short time. Tankers, unlike cargo vessels, offload very quickly. On my that long trip, the one where I went around the world, included 2 different trips to Abadan, which is in the northern end of the Persian Gulf. On the second trip, we came in on my watch, and I never had a chance to go ashore. We were ready to go back out to sea in a very short time. So, but on cargo vessels, the offloading takes a longer time. So I usually had a day or two. If I could swap shifts with somebody, I could make it a continuous stay ashore.
Do you recall hearing about the death of President Roosevelt and your reaction to that?
Yes, I do, but I don't remember where I was. I wasn't at sea. I don't remember what I was doing. I do remember hearing about it. It shook most people. I guess not only Americans, but the entire Allied community was shaken by that.
Do you recall the reaction on the ship to both VE Day and VJ Day?
I was in Times Square on VE Day. It was in between. I don't remember what the circumstances were that allowed me to meet two friends, both of whom had been, one in the 5th Air Force and one in the 8th Air Force. They had both come back. They completed their missions, and I was home at the same time, and the three of us went to Times Square to celebrate VE Day. VJ Day, I was anchored in the mouth of the Ganges. The reaction was, what a wonderful thing it was.
Do you remember hearing about the dropping of the atomic bombs?
Yes.
And your reaction to that? Do you recall?
We heard about it. Most of the people felt it was just another war incident, like any. We couldn't attach any significance to it. I always hear about super this and super that, and we didn't appreciate what was involved in that, but we did hear about it.
Now, on a merchant ship, did you have the same initiations and so on when you crossed the equator as on any of the others?
Yes, not only the equator, but the international dateline. Yes. Yeah, Neptune came aboard, and I thought it was sophomoric and overdone. But everybody seemed to have fun about it, so it was...
Okay, so when you were discharged from the service, being in the maritime service, did you have the GI Bill?
No, merchant mariners didn't get veteran status until about, I guess it was about 15 years ago.
Yeah. So now, do you join any veterans organizations now that you're eligible to do that, or have you ever?
I support the American Merchant Marine veterans, but I pay my dues. I don't attend meetings. I'm not a joiner.
Did you ever stay in contact with anyone that was in service with you, like those, you said the three friends that...
Yeah, well, two of them have dropped off the radar, but one of those fellas, the one who was my friend before the war, we have maintained very close contact. In fact, we were supposed to meet yesterday, but his wife is ill, so we postponed it for a couple of weeks. But yes, I have maintained contact with him.
How do you think your time in the service, you alluded to this at the beginning, how it changed or had an effect on your life?
It's a psychological thing. I can't really explain it. But that's a very short period. in my entire life. And yet, in thinking about my life, that portion of it plays an unusually large block. And I don't know why. I guess it's because it was the first time I was away from home. It was the first time I was on my own. It was a lot of firsts took place. But I didn't have any really frightening. In fact, the most frightening experience I had in the whole war, and this was, I didn't learn this until afterward, but when I was in the Atlantic, the Battle of the Atlantic had already been won, but it was not revealed to us. And the press and the government in general acted like the war in the Atlantic was still in a very hot situation. We were in convoy, and someone dropped a depth charge near us. You got in a Liberty ship, the hull shaped like this, and in the engine room, the boilers are, the backs of the boilers are vertical, and there's a narrow passage where you can pass between the hull and the boiler. And I was in that little passageway when this depth charge went off near us. When you're down near the waterline, sound is amplified considerably. And I thought the boiler had exploded. And in my mind's eye, I could see all this cascading hot water coming down on me, and I got out of there rather quickly. But except for practice fire, we carried fairly light armament. There was a 5-inch gun on the stern, a 3-inch on the bow, and some 50mm anti-aircraft on the bridge. We used to practice with that. Not we. We had Navy Armed Guard on board. But I never saw any real action, you know.
Now, did you wear any kind of special uniforms or just regular civilian clothes?
When I was not at sea, in the Maritime schools, we wore uniforms that were very Navy-ish. They looked, in fact, most people couldn't tell the difference. When I was at Fort Trumbull, I was chief machinist mate, and I had the same uniforms that a Navy personnel would wear.
Now, you sent us these photographs.
I did?
Yes, you did.
I don't remember that.
I believe that these were...
I don't think... I think you have the...
Okay, but let's see where...
Somebody else's.
Put with someone, okay. Okay, oh, that's a Marine Corps. Okay, I'm sorry.
No.
These were, someone at headquarters must have put them in with your thing. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for your interview.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.